Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Adapt2Changes series of executive interviews, where we talk a little bit about how people have, adapted to changes to their career. My name is Bret Rachlin, and today I'm happy to be joined with Monika Mueller, who's a senior VP in the consulting services business and has an extensive career working both for big four firms as well as boutique firms. Welcome, Monika.
Hi, Brad. Thank you for the warm welcome.
Well, thanks so much again for taking some time with me today. I really appreciate it, and I know based on our previous conversations, you've just had a fascinating career. Why don't we start a little bit and can you just describe your career path and how you take me through some of the thought process in terms of how you went from opportunity to opportunity in terms of growing your career?
hmm So I'm going to start in a space maybe you might not expect me to. I'm going to take you back to the ripe old age of 14,
Okay.
which is the current age of my daughter, by the way. I really think I began to learn sort of the benefits, the intrinsic benefits of working to just your own self-esteem, and the independence that it brought at a very, very early age. So at 14, I had the very prestigious job of being the assistant to the janitor in our high school during the summer. And at the time, I didn't know better to not be excited about that. So I was super excited about that. Rode my bike there every day during the summer, and learned sort of the ability of being able to manage my time, being able to work with different people, and then the fun that comes with being a young person and having some money and the independence that it brings. So I bring that into the fold just to say I think almost every opportunity I've had sort of stems from this desire to be able to experience new things, prove my own abilities, learn, grow, and work with a variety of different people. And that's sort of the mindset that I've gone into. Moving on from the assistant to janitor job, after college, I started with one of the big eight consulting firms. I'm sort of aging myself because it was big eight at the time, big four now. I started with Ernst& Young and really cut my teeth in consulting through sort of just working on enterprise projects with very talented people, clients that were brilliant in terms of what they were innovating, but also very challenging in their expectations of delivery. And it taught me a lot. It was like being thrown into the deep end and learning how to swim. And I think through that, I learned a lot of how I can, be resilient in my career in self-teaching things that I may not know, being able to learn and adapt on the fly. And I would highly recommend that, Brett. And I continue to encourage my kids as they think about college and the careers that they want, is to begin in a company like a big four consulting company that gives you a variety of options to learn different technologies, processes, industries, and it really allows you to get a broad view. And really, you learn how to deliver. You learn that results matter and how to achieve those results. So I've progressed through Big Four consulting and went into, actually, I remember being on an airplane on 9/11, which had a really big impact on me and really focused me on wanting to be more connected to my family, community.
Hmm.
So I wanted to get off the road, and really that's the only reason I left consulting and went to work for OnStar, which is, as you know, an in-vehicle communication system started by General Motors, really the pioneers in the telematics industry.
Hmm.
Worked with them, helped them build up their entire IT infrastructure, felt really passionate about what we were doing. Our mission was to save lives through the technology that we were implementing, and that was really fantastic. Decided to have a couple of kids and took some years off, took about 4.5 years off, lived overseas during that time. When we moved back to the United States, and I realized that I would probably be a better asset to my family if I went back to work. And so I did. And I think everybody's happy about that. So I went back in and started working for a mid-sized consulting company. So there was quite a big shift for me from going from really large enterprise companies and clients to not working at all and being focused on my family and my home to coming back into an environment that was in it with a mid-sized company. So a lot of different changes and shifts along the way. I headed a branch here in the Atlanta office for the company I worked for about 6 years. And then I'm working for a company that's a little slightly bigger in size, but very similar in terms of services. And I had their consulting services organization. So I have the pleasure of managing not only our business development and sales, but also our delivery of our strategic accounts, so that delivery and sales can stay lock and step, and we're not over promising what we can deliver or under delivering. So business development becomes more difficult. So, in a nutshell.
No, got it. And by the way, that's great. I appreciate that description. And there's a lot to unpack there, Monika. I'm going to try to take it in chronological order in terms of your career. So, and I'm very happy to hear that you talked about resilience. That's actually something I definitely want to dig into a little bit later in the conversation. So, I love the fact that the the role that you started in back when you were 14. I had a similar experience in terms of when I was 15 working for a supermarket. And I can tell you that that helped me in every future role, especially early in my career, because there were things I had to do in that job that I had not done before. I also knew I kind of had the mental fortitude to be able to get through a day, and get through some things that I might not like doing all through my day. Tell me a little bit about if you think about your first role in that summer job as an assistant to the custodian to working in a big 8, big 4 consulting firm. What did you take away from that first role that helped you in that real professional job that you later had after college?
It's interesting that going from scraping gum off of underneath desks to, helping save millions of dollars for large companies really are anchored around very similar principles. As an individual in both of those roles, I didn't know everything I needed to know to be successful in that role. And what I learned is that I needed to have the ability to learn quickly and learn sometimes on the job, but feel confident in my ability to be able to learn. And actually, maybe the best advice I've ever received from a career perspective or even a life perspective is that I would know maybe 70 or 80% of what I need to know to make anything I do successful. The other 20 to 30%, I would have to learn and stretch myself to fill in those gaps. And oftentimes I'd need to do that while I was executing the task or the job that I was doing. And I think there in itself, you learn a few things. You learn how to learn, which honestly I think is maybe the most valuable thing coming out of any educational institution for children
Hmm.
and young adults is how do I learn? How do I fill in those gaps? And then a confidence that you can do it, right? And to say yes to certain things that you may not check all the boxes for, but have the confidence in your capability, your aptitude, and the attitude to be able to learn all the functions needed to be successful.
Yeah, learning how to learn is something I talk to my kids about often, and hoping that the school is certainly helping them learn how to learn, because that's something we have to obviously incorporate throughout our lives, let alone our careers. Eh,
Exactly.
How how did you kind of develop the skill of really learning how, not only learning how to learn, but being able to learn kind of on the fly, and also how you continuously learn, knowing that you have to, things are changing in your industry, things are changing with your customer, things are changing at your own company. How did you get the discipline to start really focusing on learning while you still have to do all your work and have a life and get everything done?
hmm I think that's some of that is intrinsic and built into your personality, right?
Okay.
And some of it is coming from immigrant parents that you also see sort of having to learn, not in a work context, but just in overall life context, seeing them learn successfully how to assimilate to a new language, a new culture, and being able to have those role models, whether they're in the home or in your classroom or in your workplace, have been really influential to me. And I think I was raised with this thinking and mentality of there really isn't anything you can't do. And I think I was just naive enough to believe it. And I went into situations, just confident that I could learn. And I think I attribute confidence to, I think you build confidence by doing things and seeing that you're able to be successful at those things. So you have to take action and being able to, even if it's small action and seeing success, I think over time built success. So being able to learn how to operate the machine that cleaned the bathroom floor at 14 when I had no idea how to do that before certainly gave me confidence that I could learn to do new things. And so it's just sort of built upon itself.
Yeah, so that concept of like really honing that skill of learning. Um, what's your preference in terms of how you learn? Are you a reader? Do you like to watch YouTube videos? Do you learn from other people? A mix of all of those things? What's your focus from a learning standpoint?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question. I'm definitely a visual learner. So I'm that person, if you give, a book to or a manual to, my first response will be panic. And then it will be, I will start in the beginning, go to the end, then go to the middle. I can't read it in sequence. And I always thought that was just a terrible, terrible thing, but I realized that it's just not my learning style. So if you give me something visual, if I can see a diagram, if I can watch a video, I learn, I learn best that way. And then also, I think I was blessed to have a mom who didn't, give me the step-by-step instructions of how to do anything in life. So if I went to her saying, "Hey, I have this problem," okay, well, here's how you get started. But she didn't fill in all the blanks. And then I think that process of filling in those blanks is sort of what helps you build that learner profile.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And by the way, your comment about the manual, I don't believe really anybody can really learn just from a manual. Um, I've historically learned really from reading articles, especially tech. I've been in technology my whole career, so being able to just pick up technology from reading some of the trade publications, the IT publications, but usually because they also have examples. It's not,
Mhm.
whereas a manual, yeah, manual may have examples too, but it's so literal in terms of the order of things, where life doesn't work that way in that order. And I think that's why manuals haven't worked for me.
Mhm.
So I think that's fairly common, that I think it's very hard to learn just from a manual. The other thing that you said though that was really interesting is that when you do learn, having the confidence that you can do it. So you believe, I guess, that there's some institutional memory that just gets built up in your own head as you've learned how to do skills. Is that an accurate statement?
I think that's a very accurate statement. Absolutely. And I think, unfortunately, women especially take themselves out of the game because they don't check every single box in a job description, for example, right? Where I've looked at and said, I can do about 70% of this. I'm going to be able to learn the other 30% and feel really confident and then put forth the effort, right, to actually learn that 30%. So I think that's, it's a mindset too. And I think sometimes people put hurdles into their own way, and in terms of having to have all the boxes checked. And I firmly believe you don't have to have all the boxes checked. You just have to have that one big box that says, I can learn.
Well, and one other thing too that I've had, this has come up in some of the other interviews I've done, is also being able to play to your strengths as well. It's not to
Mhm.
say you can't learn anything new, and you should be learning new things, but oftentimes in the roles that we're in, especially as we become, higher level executives where you are working, leading teams, is that you don't have to be an expert at everything. You have to learn and understand, probably everything that you are responsible for. But you may want to have a team member who is an expert in that particular area. It's impossible for us to be experts across everything these days. And I
Agree.
think that some people struggle when they feel they have to know it to a point of expertise. And that I think creates a lot of stress.
Agreed.
So so as you continued in your career and you went from, big four, I think you kind of had that moment being on a plane on 9/11. I think a lot of people probably had some similar similar issues that day, or realizations. You may have gotten stuck in a city for a couple days depending on where you were. um, how did you adjust to working for smaller firms? And what did you have to go through to make to adapt to those smaller firms?
Yeah, it was a huge question mark in my head. And the first transition that I did is I went from consulting into industry. And that was
Right.
already a very big question mark in my head. Um, I firmly believe, based on just my own personal experience and what I've seen with other team members, 1 year in industry, or let me put it the other way, 1 year in consulting equals about 2 years in industry in terms of your own personal career development. So, and the reason being is because of this knowledge curve, this 30% that we're talking about. In every single project you join in a consulting delivery environment, it's a new client, a new team, new technology, new processes, new methodology. You're constantly learning, constantly learning. And so I had this fear that I would go into industry and I would stagnate and I would be bored and I would find it difficult to not have those challenges. And I had to get over sort of my own mental perception of it. And I think that that risk does exist in industry, but it depends on the role that you take, the company and the culture of the company that you go into. So I was really lucky because we were almost like a very well-funded startup. General Motors was our backers, and we were building something brand new. So, and we worked with Deloitte Consulting, IBM. So we were still very much involved in that sort of consulting arena. But one of the biggest things I had to realize is that things moved at a different pace in industry than in consulting. So in consulting, you're under pressure to get things done in the quickest possible fashion. And you get sort of trained to work 16 hours a day, and you expect, because your team members in consulting do that, you expect that to be the work model in industry, and it is not. And I honestly will tell you, I upset people because I had this expectation, this sort of false expectation, and it took me a while, and it took me getting feedback from my peers to say, you know, you can take a breath. We have time, right? We have time, and we want to balance life and family. And that was a really big adjustment, a very positive adjustment for me to have that realization. And so learning to go with the flow of the culture, the pace of the culture, you know, still wanting to be that person that pushes the needle a little bit, challenges the status quo, wanting to have that continuous improvement. I still managed to do that, but I needed to do it in the confines of the personalities, the people, and the culture of the company that I was with. So that was a really significant adjustment for me to go through.
Absolutely. And I think, you brought up that mental block you had to get over, as well as sort of adjusting to the work style of the industry role versus the consulting role. One of the things that I contend is that, we have to understand how our buyers buy. Okay. And in a lot of cases, when you're trying to adapt to changes, sometimes the buyer is you. You have to sell yourself on how you're going to adapt to this change. And I think that the fact that you recognized that you had a mental block is 50 to 75% of the way there. I mean, because I think that often holds back people from, really being able to adapt, because they don't know what's really blocking them. Do you think, how do you, like, when you think about it now, because, just constant change going on, how do you kind of identify with yourself, areas that you need to deal with, so that you can consistently adapt to changes that arise?
I think the biggest thing I've learned over any of the changes I've gone through is to seek advice, counsel, mentorship from others that have gone through similar things. And it's, in finding a mentor, I think it's really important to find somebody not only that has achieved what you want to achieve, but has sort of a similar personality to you, right? I remember going to a mentor who was, beyond impressive in terms of what they've accomplished, but was a very different personality than me. So their approach I couldn't adapt to. I couldn't take on because it was just too radically different in terms of how I view
Right.
things. So finding somebody that's sort of aligned in how your personality and your view of things, I think is a really important sort of sanity check. I think everybody should have mentors and advisors around them in career, in relationships, in child rearing, in community, right? Because that's where we can so easily convince ourselves of realities that are not based in reality. And you need to have somebody honest in your life that's going to call you out on your thinking that may be blocked. It may be based on misconceptions. It may be not seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And so I've found that very helpful.
Well, actually, I think that's actually one of the challenges. We're recording this today, in January of 2021. We're still in the middle of this pandemic. I think that's one of the challenges of the pandemic. I mean, everyone's doing, I think a lot of people are doing well working remotely. I mean, I think both you and I are working remotely on a regular basis.
Mhm.
However, one of the things that's missing is those kind of serendipitous conversations, whether it's with colleagues at work or at a coffee shop, or with whomever, where you bring things up about your family or your parenting or your marriage, or or your job, and you get somebody else's opinion on it. That is not happening. That just doesn't happen on the scheduled Zoom call.
No,
So,
you can't schedule
uh,
spontaneity, right?
that's exactly right. And I think that you bring up a really good point, is that it's very easy to get lost in your own reality. And that's why the whole focus on continuously learning and learning about yourself is important in terms of preparing the whole premise of this whole thing is about how do you prepare to adapt to changes? Because if you can be prepared, you're going to be that much more successful in dealing with it. The worst thing that could happen is that you get to the change and then you rear back and say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And change is going to happen regardless of whether you want to do it or not. So,
Yes, absolutely. There's, they always say there's only two things certain in life, death and taxes. I think there's three: change.
right.
It's you will, and change can be also extremely exciting, right? And
Mhm.
it's really your mindset of it, and the fear, the anxiety that seeps in is simply because you're fearful of potentially the future.
Right.
I think change. I think I've always thought change is generally a very good and positive thing. So I've embraced it.
Well, I mean, now you're speaking to the first thing that I kind of contend is about being open-minded. If you're clearly an open-minded person, if you are open to change, if you're embracing change, which means you're open, as simply as saying you're open to going to new restaurants or trying new foods. That in
Hmm.
itself is getting you on the way to change. I mean, I was a terrible eater growing up. I wasn't open to anything. I became more open in college and really became more open in my 20s, but I still have friends who will eat nothing from the sea, for example.
Yeah.
And that's pretty dramatic. When I'm 47 years old. I mean, that have friends who are older than I am who will eat nothing from the sea, other than a food allergy holding them back.
Right.
Significant in terms of a mental block, really, because I'm sure they can find something that could be appealing.
I mean, can't you batter it, deep fry it, and
Right.
eat it? Would you really know?
Right. Yeah. Anything fried is good anyway, right? So,
Exactly.
so the other thing you mentioned earlier was resilience, and I think that one of the ways that you can kind of practice resilience, because resilience obviously comes from usually going through something challenging and then knowing you can get through it. So you don't want to necessarily prepare to be resilient because you don't want to put yourself through that. However, I do think if you're trying out new skills, and when you try a new skill, for example, you're not going to be very good at it. And it can be, if you try to get good at that skill, you kind of build some resilience because you have to go through a lot of challenges to build up that skill. And you told me before that you moved a lot when you
Mhm.
were growing up. And I'm curious, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind you talking a little bit about those moves because I think that it's very challenging to move as a young person. Although I assume it is. I'm assuming
Mhm.
it's challenging to move. I didn't have to move at all as a kid. I was in the same school district my entire 13 years, before college. Tell me a little bit about the moves you made and how that has impacted your ability to be resilient and adapt to changes in your career.
It's been a direct relationship, 100%. I mean, when I talk about us moving, so let me break it down for you really, really quickly. So we immigrated from India to the United States when I was 7. And we landed and lived in the coldest cities of the United States: Buffalo, Rochester, Cleveland, Detroit. I mean, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And because my mom was a single mother, and so she was going to college and then a job, and so those are the things that precipitated our moves, right? They were all good moves for the family, but nonetheless, as a child, it was a move. So it was going to a new school. Obviously, I needed to learn English, which I didn't know. I needed to understand the culture of America, which is radically different than India. And we were here without family. And so there was a lot of challenges in the way. But honestly, Brett, when you're a child, you don't view it that way. And I think that's what we have to keep, sort of that mindset as we grow older. I didn't wake up every day thinking, wow, I have to be resilient today because I've got to learn a foreign language, or kids are making fun of me because of my accent or whatever, right? I never thought of that. It was just, I wake up and I'm going to make the best out of my day.
You just did it.
Uh, you just did it. And I feel like that, because when you're young, you're just sort of you're just naive about everything and innocent. And therefore that you don't have those fears. And that's what I've tried to carry forward. So, we moved a lot when we were young. I think in high school, I went to 4 different high schools. So talk
Wow.
about, yeah, but the cool thing I realized by like the second, third move was that I could just totally, I could learn from what I didn't like from the previous experience and reinvent myself and learn new behaviors or try different things. And so I found some good in it too. And again, at the time, I didn't think of it as such a bad thing. It's not until I started to get reactions from people that said, "Oh, wow, 4 high schools? That's tough." Where I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's tough." You know what I mean? Like, I didn't even
Right.
think about that. That's just what happened. And then, after graduation, I did my undergraduate in Cleveland, did my graduate work in Kansas City, lived in Paris for a while on a project with Ernst and Young, and then lived in Germany for a few years as well, and
Hmm.
then here in Atlanta for the last 10, almost 11 years. So I think Atlanta is maybe the longest place that I've lived somewhere. So it is nice to be in one place, but I think through those moves, you learn how to just restart and how to begin, and it is a skill set to be able to start something new. And I had sort of the framework of how I do it. How do I get to know my neighborhood, my community, my school, the activities? How do I plug in? Right. I had to do it so many times that it became sort of just a framework that I could handle. So going into a new job or a new opportunity or a new job interview, it didn't feel fearful. It felt like okay, I've done this before. I can do this
Right.
again.
Well, and I love the fact that you talked about the opportunity, and I was going to say this, and you hadn't, is like reinvent yourself.
Mhm.
So when you change the school, like let me learn from what worked, and then I'm going to reinvent myself here. You know, aren't we always reinventing ourselves when we take a new job? And your current role, where you're not only kind of heading up the delivery of the consulting services, but you're heading up sales and business development and working on marketing and other operational issues. You reinvented yourself again to be able to take on that responsibility, um, and certainly having that skill set of reinventing yourself when you were in high school, going from school to school, has to come in handy.
Absolutely. Yeah, it takes all the fear out of it. And again, as I said earlier, because when you can do things, you build confidence that you could do similar things again, right?
Hmm.
And you said earlier about resilience, and you don't necessarily want to be put in bad situations to build resilience. I almost feel like, at least speaking for my own kids, I'm doing them a disservice by making their life far too easy, right? Every now and then I want to kind of push them off the ledge so they can learn that they can actually make it and survive and make decisions and do things that would help build their own resilience. So, yeah.
Absolutely, and we have that conversation here too, in terms of my kids having lives that are quote unquote pretty easy. Not to say that my life is pretty easy growing up too, but it did help. The job I had at the supermarket threw me into situations that I had to figure out things on my own. I
Mhm.
need my kids to be in those types of situations because you really only learn when you're forced to do it yourself.
Exactly.
And I think when I said you don't want to put yourself in such bad situations to from a resilience standpoint, what I mean by that really is like the worst situations. And in fact, I just finished Malcolm Gladwell book, which has been out for several years, David and Goliath, which Gladwell covers in that book. Actually, they did a study of British prime ministers from like the early 1800s until World War II. And they found that there's over 50% of them had lost a parent by the time they were 15 years old. Now, losing a parent is it can be a very serious issue for most people. Um, and what they found is that did help them build resilience and put them in a position to kind of deal with the kind of issues that you would deal with rising up to become prime minister. The other interesting thing about it was it talked about kind of the near misses versus a direct hit in relation to kind of the bombings of London. So if you had
Mhm.
experienced the bombings and they were a little bit farther away from where you were, it was somewhat exhilarating. Like you actually took from that. Now, if you got a direct hit, you either were seriously hurt, killed, or mentally shaken from that. And it's the same thing
Right.
with losing a parent. I certainly don't want my kids to lose a parent or have to go through the blitz necessarily. But
No, not that
but
extreme. Yeah, but
but
maybe they could pay for their own gas,
uh,
you know?
or
Simple
just
stuff.
or just end
Yeah.
up, we used to end up in places, where you didn't have directions to a place. You had to figure out how to get someplace in your car. Now everyone's so reliant on the GPS built into their phones. What would
Mhm.
happen if the network went down? They couldn't get anywhere.
Well, I mean, they would have, major withdrawal symptoms, something probably like seizures where there'd be a lot of whining and crying.
Right. Exactly. So it's just how do we, yeah, and I think that's a good point for us as we get older. Yeah, the fact that the older you get, especially you see young people. I always see this when I'm doing some Peloton workouts where they'll talk about as a young person, like a baby will be learning to crawl and walk. They're doing these exercises over and over again. And as we get older, we really stop learning every day as much as we were doing as young people. And we have to have almost incorporate that into our lives so that we can deal with the changes, that are certainly coming.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Okay. All right. That's very interesting. So summing up a little bit in terms of what, you talk about our kids and things like that. Let's talk about your team members. Okay. As you can talk about your current team members, you can talk about your future team members. What advice or counsel would you give them related to adapting to changes? Like what would you suggest that they do to help them prepare to adapt to changes?
That's a great question. I think one is to simply accept that change, as we said earlier, is not avoidable. Change, to embrace the change, and to especially for my team members, as we have gone through change. I have team members, Brett, that I've never physically met. Right. Talk about change of hiring, change of onboarding, a different structure of supporting the team. Physically never having sat across from somebody at the table, but now they're an integral part of our team. We've all adapted to that change, with the confidence that we can succeed in that change. So I think it just anchors back to embracing it, and also maybe letting go of the idea of sort of preconceived notions of what the right way is, and being okay with, uh, you know, as change unfolds, that perhaps it goes a little left or a little right to the center, and pivoting it and being agile and adapting to that is really critical without feeling like that's failure. Because sometimes the best change has not been the one that I thought was going to happen, but the one that actually ended up unfolding,
Right.
which led me to, a much, much better place.
No, I think that's great counsel, Monica. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. This has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it.
It was great to talk to you, Brett. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, once again, this has been Bret Rachlin with Adapt2Changes, our video series. Until next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.